So hello everyone, thanks for joining us. Welcome to this presentation, which is part of an ongoing GOOS webinar series about projects associated with global sustained ocean observing. I'm Albert Fisher. I'm the director of the Global Ocean Observing System Project Office, which is based at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of Paris. And I'll be moderating today. And during the next hour, we'll start with an approximately 30-minute presentation from Tim Moltmann, who is the director of Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System. After the presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session by chat. I will moderate and select and answer, ask the questions verbally. I'll try to select questions that are representative, and we'll attempt to answer as many questions as we have time for. The chat window is open right now. You can see it in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, so you can ask questions, clarifying questions during the presentation. The session is being recorded, and a link will be posted on the GOOS webpage once the recording is ready. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Tim for his presentation. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Albert. So my name is Tim Moltmann. I'm the Director of Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System, based at the University of Tasmania here in Hobart, where it's a sunny 2.2 degrees Celsius, but I'm in the warmth of my study, so all is good. So thanks for taking the time to hook in, and hopefully you'll find this interesting and we'll have a good discussion. So outline of the talk, 3 minutes, or 3 things rather, over 30 minutes. I'll talk about what IMOS is and why it was established. I'll talk about how it works, and I think importantly we'll focus on some lessons learned and future directions, and it would be great to discuss that with you. So what is it and why was it established? This will be a brief introduction. What IMOS is a national collaborative research infrastructure funded by Australian government, and those 4 things are important. It's a national system, so we have observing assets all around Australia's ocean territory. It's collaborative, and you can see the logos of the operating institutions down one side of the slide there, and that's really important. None of those institutions could do this job by themselves, but collectively together we can do a great deal. It's a research infrastructure project, and that means it's like a telescope or a vessel. We're there to provide ocean observations and data primarily for the research and scientific and academic communities to do research, obviously with relevance and impact to society. It's different. That's a somewhat different approach to other systems. Say, I'm very familiar with the IOS system in the US, which has got a much more operational focus. And I think we will talk about the interaction of those things through the discussion. So what IMOS has done, as I said, and the core funding has come from Australian government, albeit we've been able to make quite good partnerships with other forms of government and in some cases with industry partners and others. So it provides a means for multiple institutions in Australia to undertake systematic and sustained observing of the marine environment, and importantly we make all of our data openly available for research and other purposes, and that's a key part of the system. Why was it established? Well, oceans matter to Australia as a marine nation. We have very valuable marine industries, offshore oil and gas industries, fishing and aquaculture, tourism. As an island, a nation, and borders are maritime, so national security is a big issue for us in the ocean. Australia is a very coastal nation. The vast majority of people, probably 85%, live on or very near the coast, and so they use a lot of ecosystem services from the ocean. Australia is a land of droughts and flooding rains, so our climate and weather is strongly moderated and influenced by the oceans that surround us. And we have amazing marine biodiversity in our oceans, and probably uniquely for any country that goes from the high tropics to Antarctica. And so we have World Heritage assets such as the Great Barrier Reef that we have to look after. That said, historically our marine observing effort was quite uncoordinated, and we really had 3 big problems. First of all, we had quite poor coverage. Any map of historical ocean observations will show you that they're dominated in the northern hemisphere, and so there's a big challenge for us down here in the south, and certainly Australia had that as a nation. We were quite fragmented. Those institutions that I talked about before were all doing good things, but they were doing it in isolation and not in a coordinated or shared and open way. And we weren't sustaining things. We would start things through projects or programs and then stop them again. And essentially IMOS was established to try and overcome those 3 problems. And it was set up in 2006 and so we're just entering our 10th year, which is fantastic. The final point that's important to make for an audience like this is that Australia benefits greatly from GOOS, and so through IMOS we're able to make a stronger contribution. IMOS is now recognised as the GOOS Regional Alliance, which we're delighted about, but we're trying to make contributions to GOOS observing system components like Argo and others, and we'll talk about that. And also we're looking to contribute to and benefit from the future development of GOOS, particularly with the new panel structure. So how does it work? So I'll talk about science nodes, and I'll talk about observing facilities. They're the fundamental constructs of the system. I'll talk about data access and use, and then I will touch on performance indicators, because it's one thing to say how does it work, it's another thing to really assess whether it does work. So how it works, we have organised our scientific community into a series of nodes. So we have an open ocean node, which we call the Blue Water and Climate node, and then we have a series of regional nodes that essentially cover Australia's shelf and coastal oceans. Australia is a federation of states, and so inevitably we do end up with regional systems that are quite well aligned to our states like Western Australia or Queensland, so on. And what that community have done is they've written essentially a series of, over the years, national science and implementation plans, and those plans set out why we're doing this, what do we need to observe, where, when and how, and through that we've identified 29 essential ocean variables that we're measuring through the program. We started that with, I guess, 6 separate plans that were sort of developed as a package, but gradually as the system's matured and as I think our communities become more comfortable with working in this way, we now have a single national plan with 6 node chapters, and that's been an important development for us. The other thing I should note is that in 2009-10 we put those node plans out for international peer review, which was a fantastic thing to do, and we learned much from that, and we continue to undertake reviews of parts of the portfolio. Those science and implementation plans are structured around 5 major research themes, and if you hark back to some of the motivations for setting up the system that I said in the first slide or two, this will make some sense. So we're obviously interested in long-term change in the oceans. We're very interested in climate variability and extremes. We have 3 modes of variability in our region that are important, and so particularly important at the moment: IOD and the Southern Indian Ocean Dipole and the Southern Annual mode. Boundary currents are really important in Australia, being an island continent. So we have the East Australian current, which is the western boundary current, the Lewin current, an odd poleward flowing boundary current on the western side of the country, and the Indonesian through flow, which connects the Pacific and Indian Oceans. We have a strong focus on shelf and coastal processes, eddy fields, coastal currents, upwellings and so on, which are important biologically. And we have a focus on ecosystem responses around productivity, abundance and distribution of marine species, and also we're trying to think about pelagic and benthic systems. So how does it work? So the facilities are really the engine room of the system. These are what we invest in and how we make it work. So I will dwell on this slide just for a little while. So through IMOS, we're providing the cornerstone of Australia's contribution to the Global Argo program. We have a ship of opportunity facility that's quite diverse. We do a range of things through that, many standard things like sea surface temperature, validation and CSC fluxes, partial CO2, those kinds of things. But we also do, our continuous plankton recorder program is done through that facility. And we're also doing bioacoustics using echo sounders on fishing vessels to try and get at the mid-traffic levels in the ecosystem. So that's it's quite a cost-effective way to do a lot of different kinds of observing. Those ships are a combination of research vessels, merchant vessels, ferries, and as I said, fishing vessels. We have a deep water mooring facility that's focused around 4 major activities at the moment. One in the Southern Ocean, doing air sea fluxes and carbon cycling. One on the Antarctic shelf, looking at Antarctic bottom water formation and fate. And 2 in those boundary currents and interbasin flows that I mentioned before. Transport array in the East Australian current off Brisbane at about 32 south, and transport array up in the Indonesian through flow between Australia and Timor-Leste. In fact, we have moorings in the waters of Timor-Leste, and we're very grateful for their cooperation. And that work obviously links in with work done by the US and others in that region. We have a glider fleet, and we're using both cyclone gliders on the shelf and coast and sea gliders in the deep water. We have an autonomous underwater vehicle facility using a Sirius vehicle, and that's doing benthic imagery at a series of reference sites around the country, both tropical, temperate, east coast, west coast, to try and get some comparisons happening. We have a national mooring network. That's the largest facility in the system, and it has a few components. It has a series of 7 long-term reference sites that are strategically placed around our coasts. We're lucky to have 3 sites that, for various reasons, have been maintained over quite long periods of time, up to 70 years in one case. And we've brought those into the national system and expanded them to give better coverage. That facility also has a series of shelf mooring arrays in the regions, and the other components of it includes our OSHA certification moorings, or at least at the moored work, and we also have a series of passive acoustic loggers, noise loggers. Interestingly, some of the data from those loggers has been used in the search for Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 in the Indian Ocean, where we've been combining data from those loggers with other assets in the region to try and help with that search. So that's our national mooring network. We have an ocean radar network that has 12 installations at 6 sites around the country, and that's a mix of Vera, 4 of those sites of Vera, and 2 are CODA. We have an animal tagging and monitoring network that has 2 components, a satellite component, so you can see a beautiful elephant seal down at the bottom of that slide, and we also have an acoustic component where we put in loads of MCO receivers to pick up movements of sharks and other animals. We have a wireless sensor network on the Great Barrier Reef, which we enable our research community to plug lots of more sensors into, and we have a satellite remote sensing facility that's focused on, to some level, on acquisition, but mainly on calibration and validation, and that includes sea surface temperature, ocean colour, and altimetry, and also on product processing and delivery. So that's basically what's in the toolkit. Importantly, for this audience, we try and make sure that all of our facilities are nested within the relevant global programs, and many of those will be familiar to people on the webinar. And it's great to be able to make a contribution to those programs, but we benefit hugely as a nation from that, and we thank you all for your cooperation. The I in IMOS, the integrated, means 2 things to us. We're trying to integrate across scales, as I said, from open ocean onto the continental shelf and into the coast. And so in a GOOS context, that's important because our open ocean work is probably tending to feed more into the JCOM processes through facilities like Argo and so on, whereas the shelf coastal work is probably feeding more strongly through the GOOS Regional Alliance system. The other form of integration for us is across physics, chemistry and biology, and I think our system has been quite advanced, I guess, in trying to push the boundaries on doing that biophysical integration. It's not easy, and we'll come back to that in future challenges. But we're very excited by the new structure, panel structure within GOOS, or reasonably new, that has focus on across those disciplines. And we're particularly excited about the new biology and ecosystems panel, and we're hoping to engage strongly with that because we certainly need help in designing and evolving our system on that front. One of the most, well, probably I think the most important part of the system, and one reason we've been able to make it work quite well, is that we've had a very strong focus on data. And so in this program, I can put my hand on my heart and say to the government that every observation we take, it can be discovered, accessed, used and reused through a national marine information infrastructure that we've developed through the program. So from the outset, we've put about 10% of our core investment into this, and that's been a very good investment. So you can go to our Ocean portal and you can find what you need, searching by parameter, by organisation, by platform, by date, by geographic boundary. You can subset and target your searching into just what you need, and then you can download that data in common usable formats like NetCDF or CSV. And we're doing that across all that range of facilities that I mentioned before. It's important to stress that this isn't just a portal, it's not just a piece of software. It really is an information infrastructure, and we put a lot of effort into things like data quality standards. Control vocabularies are very important services, and so that's another area where we benefit greatly from international collaboration and hope to continue to do so into the future. Just to give you some idea, you know, if you go to our website, there are data reports that will tell you the status of our data holdings. They're updated on a monthly basis, but we have you know, large numbers of measurements building up there across those facilities. And what's important to understand is they're not just large numbers, but they're actually brand new resources that our scientific community and other users can begin to use and mine and extract knowledge and information from. We simply didn't have those things in place before we started the program. So whilst I said it's a research infrastructure program, I think the infrastructure is really the data holdings. The equipment is very important. It's the way we do get those observations and data, but it's ephemeral. It will come and go. An Argo float's life will eventually end. A mooring may not even come back, but it's the data that will endure. The other thing that we're starting to do more of, and I'll talk about this in the wrap-up, I think, we're trying to add more value to the data, because that is what a lot of the users and supporters of this kind of system really want. Many people in government and industry are not necessarily interested in the raw data. They want the value-added analyses and products. We fund that, I guess, to some level where it's sensible within the program, but often we have to partner with others to do that. So a good example of that is our Ocean Current site, which is run by some people at CSIRO, Madeline Carl, David Griffin. And through that system we produce daily maps of currents, temperature, ocean colour, using all the real-time data that we can get access to. I really like this facility for a couple of reasons. One, they're sort of a super user of our facilities, so often if something goes wrong or breaks, it's these folks that are able to raise that with us and we can work out what's wrong. But also it's making ocean data available to a much wider audience. So fishermen use this site on a daily basis, yachtsmen and women, ocean swimmers and so on. So it's a nice way for us. It's scientifically robust. It's used in anger by the science community during research voyages or glider missions, but it's also got a broader appeal to the public. The hits on that site increase dramatically in our summer when we have a significant yacht race that goes from Sydney to Hobart. People want to know what the East Australian Current is doing. So that's how it works, and I'll just talk briefly about whether it works. We think it does, obviously. So we have 4 performance indicators, and this is probably of interest to people that are involved in ocean observing programs. So we focus on deployment and recovery of equipment, clearly, and that's a challenge in the ocean. We make all our data discoverable accessible, but we also try and ensure that the data is taken up and used, and that the science outputs that are produced have relevance and impact, because at the end of the day it's society and government and industry that are providing the support to do this. We think we're pretty well organised on deployment and recovery and data access, and they are things that we can control quite well within the program. So our facilities have quarterly milestones. We produce forward activity plans so everyone knows what we're doing, where and when. We have workflows which chart out the steps in the process from deploying an instrument right through the data being on our ocean portal. We produce daily or monthly data reports, as I showed you before, and we have the portal there and working. Ensuring the uptake and use of the data and that it has relevance and impact is harder. We have less control over those things, but they are very important in terms of the long-term future of the program. And at the end of the day, it's why we have it. So I'll talk about those 2 things a little more. In terms of uptake and use, we have a publications database where we try and record all the projects and programs that are making use of IMOS data, all the talks given at conferences and seminars on the data, obviously the peer-reviewed publications and reports that are produced using the data, and how it feeds into models and analyses and climatologies. And that's information that we have to report. to our government on an annual basis, and it's a good discipline to do that. It is quite challenging to gather that information, and we're trying to look at better acknowledgements, digital object identifiers, and those kind of things to get smarter about that. And up in the top corner there, you can just see a graph of how the uptake is increasing through years. In terms of the relevance and impact, we think about it in this way. We have an IMOS that's operated by a small number of institutions, but because we've engaged the broader community in the planning and we make all of the data openly accessible, it can be used by all. So, for example, some universities, like my own, are involved in running the program, but other universities who we don't fund to do anything can still use the program through their students and academics. That enables us to generate quite a wide range of outputs, and they go from hard scientific outputs, peer-reviewed publications and PhDs, right through to the data being used in operational forecasting on a daily basis. And that enables us to have relevance across a broad range of sectors in government, industry and society. So we're funded through a science and education line, but we have relevance to defence activities or emergency response or environmental management and so on. And we try and make sure, one way we try and ensure that that impact is to partner with all the major research programs that are undertaking that kind of science and delivering into the stakeholder base. And I think we've made quite good progress on that.
Thank you very much, Tim. That was a great talk. It was very, very clear, very structured, and personally, it was gratifying for me to see some of the ideas from the framework for ocean observing infused into your talk. So we've got two questions already, actually, and why don't we just go ahead and ask them. So we have a question from Eric Lindstrom, and please, other audience members, you're welcome to ask questions. Please just type them into the chat window that you'll see in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. So Eric is asking, what is the main size or the aim of the size of the workforce to maintain IMOS and headquarters coordination and at the nodes? And overall, I don't. Well, and just to follow up on that, maybe I don't think you mentioned what is the yearly budget of IMOS in terms of funding the entire structure. So you've mentioned that IMOS is made up of nodes, a global node and regional nodes, and then these observing facilities. And in those regional nodes, how much heterogeneity is there in their priorities for observations? And has that come together over time, over the 10-year history of IMOS, or has it maintained its diversity?
So that's how we think about the performance of the system. So, I think that hopefully I'll explain how it works and why we set it up. I really want to focus now on the lessons we've learned in the first 10 years or so and future directions. And I want to talk about four things. First of all, defining requirements and getting into this issue of research and operations. I want to talk about assessing readiness and introduce a concept around dynamic infrastructure. I want to talk about improving usability through data quality, data products and modelling. And I'll finish by talking briefly about some developments in operational oceanography in Australia which we're quite excited about. So defining requirements, as I said, IMOS was established as a research infrastructure, so our requirements have been set through science planning, and I talked about that earlier. But in our country, and I know it's true from colleagues in many other countries, there is increasing demand for science that's relevant to the blue economy. And we've just released a new National Marine Science Plan in Australia, which you can get a hold of via our website and other sources. And that has a strong focus on trying to ensure that marine science is making a material difference to our economy. So I think we increasingly need to move to defining research and operational requirements in a joined-up dialogue, rather than thinking about those research versus operations or them being separate things. We need to focus more on sustained observing for many uses, and I was interested to see that a fairly recent national plan for civil Earth observations in the US has taken this kind of approach, talking about sustained observing for many uses as opposed to experimental or shorter term observing, which is also important, but is of a different nature. So that's something that we're trying, I think we'll put increasing focus on as we move into our next phase. Assessing readiness, so up in the right-hand corner there you can see the framework for ocean observing, which would be familiar to many people here. And we're finding readiness, the readiness construct within the framework to be a really useful way of balancing the need to be both robust and reliable, but also responsive to new science and technology. So, you know, we're running this as an infrastructure, as I said, and infrastructures they're solid, they're robust, they need to work. So but this is science and technology, so we need to be responding to new knowledge, things we discover we didn't know, and to technical innovation. So we find this construct of readiness to be very useful, and we've started to talk about having a dynamic infrastructure that will move through readiness levels over time. So if you think about the mature end of that, as I said, as a research infrastructure almost has to work, so it's not surprising that many components of our system are quite mature. I would argue things like Argo, or core Argo at least, ship of opportunity work borings are very much at that mature end of the spectrum. We have piloted a number of technologies which are new to Australia, and our challenge in the next phase is to mature some of them from a sustained observing system perspective. So certainly in Australia, gliders and radar have been technologies that have been new to Australia in the IMOS era. We've got some really good results out of those facilities, but so with gliders, for example, we think we need to mature the way we're operating, and particularly in our boundary current systems. The other thing that we piloted at some scale is investing in biological observing at all trophic levels, and I referred to that before. Benthic surveying, quite a lot of plankton work through CPR tows and physical sampling, bioacoustics for mid-trophics, passive acoustics for fish song, whale song and so on, physical sampling, and animal tracking, both acoustic and satellite. And we've made, I guess, no regrets investments in all those things, but we're very keen to work with the Biology and Ecosystems panel of GOOS to see, are they actually the right things for us to be measuring in this space? Will they really give us the answers to the questions we're hoping through time? So I think I would describe that body of work as being in the pilot phase and something we want to mature going forward. In terms of concept, IMOS doesn't tend to fund proof of concept as a research infrastructure, but what we're trying to do is partner with the communities developing the new concepts, so that gives us a good connection to, if you like, the next stage pilot. So a good example at the moment is we're partnering with the marine microbial community at the proof of concept level, and in a thing called the Australian Marine Microbial Biodiversity Initiative. So what we're doing is taking water samples at our 7 long-term reference stations and then working with them to get the sequencing of bioinformatics done. And that's looking quite interesting, and we're just about to take that work to a new stage. But obviously, you know, when will we be ready to do in situ microbial observing within our system? We don't know yet, but we're working with that community to try and figure that out. I think that the final point I want to make about readiness is that today's mature can be tomorrow's concept. So if we think about Argo, we've got core Argo working brilliantly, but we're now experimenting with bio-Argo and deep Argo, and we have to go back through that readiness chain to figure out the concepts, to do the piloting and eventually mature those. So I think It's really important to remember that as well. It's not static, it's dynamic. The second last point I want to make is around improving usability. Data quality continues to be a challenge for IMOS. No matter how hard we've tried, our community tends to want to spend more money on taking new observations rather than spending money on quality controlling what we've got. And we continue to grapple with that. We're now beginning to look at quality control by essentialization variable, and as I said, we have 29 of those, so that is a big piece of work. But there's a lot of international effort going on in that area.
So
we can benefit greatly from the work done by the GOOS panel and some of the GROs. We're very thankful for the work that IOS does through its CORTOD process, and we like to engage with that and hopefully feedback and benefit others as well. We are trying to partner to produce more data products. As I said, many of the users don't want raw data. They really want analysis and models, but we need to remind them that those things need observations and they need to value the observing system if they want those things. And so we just hope we were about to produce our first plankton report, which we hope will be an annual report making some observations about the state of Australia's oceans using plankton as an indicator of ecosystem change. And that work's been done in partnership with the CSIRO. And I guess the other thing is about trying to improve the usability of the observing system through partnering with the modelling community. I said earlier that we put our science plans out for international peer review in 2009-10, and that was a really valuable thing to do. The clearest, most consistent feedback we got from our reviewers was that we needed to pay more attention to how the observing system was working with the modelling, and we've taken that quite seriously in the last few years and made a lot of progress, and that's been really pleasing to see. So we now have regional modelling efforts that are built up around our regional observing systems, particularly ROMS-based modelling by our university sector. We've started a series of Australian coastal oceans modelling and observations workshops. We run them every 2 years with a shifting focus. The first time it was largely a bit of a show and tell of what was going on in the country. The next year we focused a bit more on, we made data assimilating biogeochemical modelling a bit of a focus. Next year we hope to actually start to push into ecosystem modelling a bit more. So we have a bit of a long-term plan for how to use that mechanism to strengthen and grow the interactions between the observing system and the modelling. And we've got investment into a thing we call the Marine Virtual Laboratory, or MARVEL, which is an online portal that simplifies the process of marine modelling. And that's enabled us to develop a data atlas of coastal and shelf waters over the last 20 years. And you can see in the graph on the right there that the IMOS era kicks in around about 2009, and you can see that step change we have in observations on our shelf, which is great. And we're hoping to be able to use that system to undertake an Australian national shelf reanalysis. We have quite good reanalysis in the open ocean through the Blue Link project, the brand reanalysis, but that doesn't, and it's not intended to do that job on the shelf. And we have now an opportunity with a step change in our observations and improved modelling capability to do that. And so my final slide really is just around operational oceanography in Australia, and so we've just held the inaugural forum for operational oceanography. Unfortunately, it's another FOO, but that went really well, and we had 125 participants. What we tried to do there is bring together what we think of as the 4 pillars of operational oceanography. So the R&D provider is obviously important, but the government agencies that provide services, our Bureau of Meteorology, Maritime Safety Authority, those kinds of things. With the service providers, the environmental and mid-ocean consultants, and the end-use industries like oil and gas and ports and shipping and fishing. As I said, it went well, and we had strong support for that to endure. And we've identified some priority areas that we want to try and work on as a community, and by that I mean not just the R&D community, but all of them. And so we're going to put some focus, we hope, on things like surface currents and waves, thermal structure, particularly off the Northwest Shelf, consensus forecasting approaches, and data products and stewardship. So we want to take a value chain approach that starts with the need for improved safety and efficiency and come back to other research needs. So that's it. Hopefully I've explained what IMOS is and why it was established, how it works, our nodes and facilities, the data access and performance indicators, and the lessons we've learned, and hope to work with you all in the future around defining requirements, assessing readiness, improving usability and operational oceanography. So I'll leave it there, Albert. Thank you. So the program supports probably about 80 full-time equivalent staff through all of its components, but most of them are in the facilities. So the office is 6 staff, me, an office assistant, a project manager, a scientific officer, a project officer, and a communications manager. So most of the action is out in the operating facilities. The data team is quite large. We've got about 15 staff in the data team. And so the data team and the head office are co-located, and as I said, that's been, I think, really important to the success, because it's the way we make it tick. And so having those two things managed by the same institution located together has been really important. If I have an answer, sorry, yes, Carl. It's fluctuated a bit, Albert. So when we started out, it was funded at $50 million over 5 years, so $10 million per annum. In the second phase, we had the opportunity to grow it up to $18 million per annum for 4 years. But it's been quite difficult to maintain the funding at that level in our current funding climate, and we've ended up on annual funding in recent years. That's sitting at about 14, 15 million at the moment. So that's still that's a sizable investment, and it's been great for our country because it's brand new investment. It's not doing stuff we weren't doing before. So yeah. I think, yeah, there is definitely heterogeneity, and that's appropriate because the marine systems that we're studying are quite different. What you need to do on the Great Barrier Reef and what you need to do on a narrow continental shelf off Sydney that's dominated by an eddy field, they're different issues, and it's different science, different observing assets are needed. So we've tried to do that in a way that's appropriate to the marine systems. We think that structure has two benefits. First of all, many of the questions we're trying to answer through our regional nodes and Open Ocean node really require multiple assets, multiple observing assets to work to answer those questions. So the system enables us to pull the strength of all those different things together. So for example, we run gliders off the east coast, off Sydney on the east coast. They're piloted from the University of Western Australia on the west coast, and we can do that.
So you mentioned that
we don't have to recreate those facilities in all the places around the country. And secondly, there's an efficiency in running national facilities delivering into multiple regions. Because as I said, you don't have to keep creating those.
Operational products, not all of it. So do you see that as being a bigger argument?
We do keep pretty busy trying to make it all work. It is quite complex.
Infrastructure? Is it going to be more than just a research infrastructure, but a research and an operational infrastructure in the future?
Outreach programs, how will they work? And various industrial users are also strong, particularly in the summertime.
Yeah, so it's not as strong a drive in Australia as I think it is in other systems like the US, and that's not necessarily a good thing. It's just I'm making that observation, I guess. So as I said, we're funded as a research infrastructure, so our performance measures are really around how we're delivering to the science and research community and academic communities. That said, we're very aware that we need to build support from a wider audience, but we don't have a dedicated outreach strand in the program at the moment. We tend to try and do that through partnerships. For example, in Science Week a couple of years ago, we did a project called Explore the Seafloor, where we got the public to score images from our AEV facility, and it was great. We had about 8,000 people do a lot of work for us, and they actually did pretty well. So we're looking at those kinds of things, but the way we're funded at the moment, we have to structure partnerships to do that rather than have a dedicated funded outreach program within IMOS.
You talked about two other
but certainly,
integration.
Many of our partners are involved with science and school type programs, and we're trying to get IMOS useful to those things. We've probably made more progress with things like masters and PhD and some degree undergraduate training in universities. That's not outreach per se, but we've tended not to have a focus on the schools directly, but do that through our partnerships.
A big step up in the number of people and the number of observations that IMOS will try to manage?
You mentioned the importance of transforming data into useful information and including through modeling.
So I guess as the director of the program, I spend a lot of my time working around that outer layer. For example, one of those partnerships is with the Great Australian Bight Research Program that's been undertaken by CSIRO and the South Australian Research Development Institute and a couple of universities in that region with BP. And they're looking at exploration in quite deep water in the Great Australian Bight. So we've worked with them to ensure that that program is using all the IMOS observations that are available in that region, which are quite significant. But they're extending that observing program, including through flying additional glider missions, extending bioacoustic and CPR work. And so we've established a partnership where that data will come into the system and grow our holdings. And so we're really trying to do those kinds of things. But I think Australia has it's a big country spatially, but it's a small country population-wise. And so one reason I think we're able to do some of these things here is that we know everybody, and we know what's going on, we know what the programs are, and we're able to try and build those partnerships. So we have a bit of a middle power or Goldilocks advantage, just right size. We're big enough to be investing at some scale, but small enough that the coordination is plausible. But yeah, it does provide challenges, but I think we have a lot to offer because we now have these facilities that work. That the program I'm referring to with BP, they didn't need to set up a new glider activity to do that. They could just plug into the one we've already got and benefit from it. Yeah, that's how we do it.
And then
a couple of questions
axis of integration you talked about is from physics.
So we certainly do identify
biology.
Gaps and new needs. So our science plans, they've got a 10-year look, so those plans are set out to 2025. So obviously they're guiding what we're doing now, but they identify notable gaps and future priorities that can inform what to do next. and so yeah, that's probably the main way we do it.
In the physical world,
we're engaged. I guess engagement in the international programs is another way that we try and do that. We try and make sure that we're staying relevant and up to date through engagement in the international programs.
Have you tried to
They're probably
organizations within
main ways
that
we
hold
do
that type of data about human intelligence?
So what mechanism is used by us for this OS monitoring, observing system monitoring? Yeah. So hopefully I've answered Nico's question there. So what I didn't make probably really explicit was that IMOS isn't funded as a standalone entity. It's funded as part of a broader national collaborative research infrastructure program called NCRIS. And so, when that program was established back in 2006, when we got the first 50 million, that was a $500 million program that funded, I think, a dozen major national facilities in our country. So, and there are similar programs in other countries. I've done a couple of reviews in Canada for the Canada Foundation for Innovation, so somewhat similar kind of system there. So really, it's been about convincing our government to continue to invest in national scale infrastructure, and because our science and community has been able to do that, we've been able to then say, well, if you're doing that, one of the things you need to do is an integrated marine observing system, we've performed quite well and proven that we can deliver the benefits. So yeah, I mean, IMOS is seen to be one of the strongest NCRIS capabilities, and in fact, it's helped to sell that whole program because it's been effective. So we've managed to keep it going in that way for now. But
and let me ask this question for
it is. What will be the? We spent a lot of time working on trying to get the next batch of funding, and in the last few years, that's been a year-by-year proposition, which has been very challenging to run a research infrastructure, particularly when you're committing, into the future to deploying large moorings and getting them back maybe in a couple of years' time. Every time we put a float in the water, that's going to operate for 5, 7, maybe 9 years if we're lucky. So we're always forward committing into the future. But look, funding challenges would be familiar to everyone, I think, on the webinar. We're not unique. We just have our own version of that. It's actually governance sense. The University of Tasmania, so my organisation, is a lead organisation. So we've signed the contracts with the government, and then subcontracted to the other operators to implement parts of the system. So it's not, IMOS isn't an organisation at all. It's just it's not an incorporated entity. It's a partnership. No, that's straight from government to the University of Tasmania as the lead organisation, and then through the processes that I described, we then subcontract with the other operators like the CSIRO or the University of Western Australia to implement the facilities that we've agreed they're going to operate. Yes, Jack, they are. So I don't know. We might certainly. I could show you ocean current images that have radar currents on them. So I can't pull it up at the moment. But the answer to your question is yes. So yeah, we're certainly looking at citizen science and trying to partner with some of those programs at the moment. The feature of the funding issue that we were talking about before was that 2009, when we had the second phase of investment, that enabled us to expand the program by about 80%.
So Tim, thank you very much.
That's the last time we've really had the opportunity to invest in new things. So since then, we've really been in an operations and maintenance mode, which I'd have to say, you know, in 2015, that's starting to feel like quite a long time. So we're looking forward to trying to position for a new stage of investment where we can begin to take on some new things.
Right.
You know, using the readiness as I described, we have been able to drive some efficiencies and make some decisions